Pillow talks taxes. He has been for over 45 years. There isn't a human on the planet with more experience solving problems on behalf of taxpayers. And he wants to solve your problem whether you know you have one or not. If you do have a tax problem, call the office or visit TaxHelpOnline.com. If you don't have a tax problem, your current tax problem is taxes themselves. So let's get into the policy issues of today. Pulled a headline earlier that said the Treasury Inspector General report says IRS focused 90% of its audit on people making under $400,000 a year. Even though it was promised by the Biden administration, it was promised those new agents that were getting hired by the IRS were not going to be focused on people making under that amount. They were going to be focused on billionaires. Are you telling me that the Democrats lied to me?
Listen, I said this right from the start. As soon as the Biden administration proposal was released in February of 2021, the ink wasn't dry on their proposal, and I told you then that it was a fraud. I wrote a number of articles that were published in National Review over that next probably 6 or 8 months, specifically showing you why it was going to be a scam. Not the least of which was a statement from the former Commissioner of Internal Revenue Service, Charles Reddick, who was Commissioner during the Biden administration, that reiterated that we aren't going to go after anybody making less than $400,000 a year in historical context. As a historical reference, how much time has the IRS spent on people making $400,000 a year or less? And so I did some research. On this, Josh. You will not be surprised to learn that I dug pretty deeply into IRS audit data and collection and enforcement data. And here's what I learned. There's about 15 different categories of taxpayers that the IRS uses, all right? Individuals and small businesses, wage earners, large and mid-sized companies, estates and trusts, government agencies, exempt organizations. That's about 6 of them off the top of my head. There's about 14 or 15 of them. 60% of all IRS enforcement action historically has been pointed at small businesses and self-employed people. That's just one category of the 14. 60% of all enforcement action goes toward one category, which is small business and self-employed. And I told you right from the start, because I went through the Biden administration proposal very carefully. I went through it with a fine-tooth comb, and I talked about it at length in my articles on National Review. Those articles are still published, so go to nationalreview.com and check it out. Just put my name in the search box, and you'll get my articles, and go back to the 2021 articles on the Biden administration turning the dogs loose. I point out there that the Biden administration's workbook, not the stuff that I dug out from the IRS, but the Biden administration's workbook demonstrated that they believe the vast majority of tax cheating was coming in this one area of small business and self-employed. The overwhelming majority of people that fall into that small business self-employed category, Josh, are people earning less than $400,000 a year. So this whole thing was a scam right from the start. And I tied a can to it right from the very beginning. I told you this was going to happen.
That was a very long-winded I told you so. But yeah, you really did. I was there. I remember the article. I could probably farm a video montage of these people saying, we're not going to go after anybody under this income level. We're only going after billionaires. We knew it from the very beginning that they were just simply lying. And it gets worse when you know that the IRS's own statistics tell you that they're wrong about their own audit data, which just makes everything worse.
Troubling fact that the IRS's audit results are wrong, and I've documented this. It's in my book, How to Win Your Tax Audit. I've got the numbers right in the book. The IRS's audit results are wrong between 60 to 90% of the time. The problem is most people don't understand how to challenge the IRS's audit results. So when they tell you they're going after any category of taxpayer, it doesn't make any difference what it is. The fact of the matter is it's the high income people that can afford to hire the hotshot lawyers and accountants that are necessary to put the IRS through their paces and to make sure that the taxpayer doesn't pay more taxes than they owe. But it's the lower income citizen that don't have that legal and accounting talent at their fingertips to be able to stop the IRS from making these bogus claims. So that's the other part of the problem. That's what adds insult to injury. It's one thing to go after low income people, but it's worse when the IRS knows that those low income people are largely undefended and mostly ignorant about how the the system works, and they're certainly ignorant about what their rights are and how to challenge the IRS's audit results.
Now that brings up a really good question. If someone who is low income and experiencing a tax problem right now, what should they do in order to, for the best bang for their buck, solve their tax problem? What ways can they solve their tax problem being a low income individual?
Well, that's why I wrote the books that I have, Josh. I've written 14 books over the last 30 years or so, 35 years, whatever it's been, that specifically show people how to deal with the IRS. I've got a book called How to Win Your Tax Audit, which is the most comprehensive discussion of the tax audit process that's ever been written for the public. Shows you step by step how to go through the tax audit, how to defend yourself in a tax audit, how to appeal a tax audit decision if that becomes necessary. My book, How to Get Tax Amnesty, is the book that created the tax resolution industry as we know it. That's the book that shows you how to stop wage levies and bank levies, how to deal with property seizures, how to get rid of tax liens, how to negotiate with the IRS for a settlement for less than you owe. I give example after example in the book of how to go in there and say, look, IRS, I owe you $100,000. There's no way I can possibly pay it, but I can pay, let's say, $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000. And we negotiate these settlements all the time. People have used my book successfully. Josh, I have a stack of testimonial letters from people who have used my book successfully and then send me letters saying, Dan, if it wasn't for your book, I never would have fixed this problem. So go to my website, TaxHelpOnline.com. That's all one word, TaxHelpOnline.com. Order any book off my website. There's about 6 or 8 of them that are in print right now. Order any book at any price point. The link is in the description.
There's been a whole week of news headlines of Trump cutting this and slashing that, and now all of a sudden Trump's froze the federal financial programs, and everybody is crying because now the government isn't handing out money anymore.
The executive office of the president, Donald Trump, froze federal government's process of issuing grants, loans, and financial assistance to every organization in the country that's been getting federal grants, loans, and financial assistance. And I find it fascinating because people went crazy about this. Oh my God, we're not going to get our money anymore. And one of the groups of people that went crazy, Josh, are those folks that get grants from the Internal Revenue Service. Now, you probably didn't know this, but the IRS actually gives out hundreds of millions of dollars of grants. Not only do they collect the money, Josh, but they actually give money away back to organizations that help people out there in society to comply with the tax laws. Millions of dollars worth of grants, those were frozen. Now,
clarifying question here. So are you talking about companies like H&R Block, like TurboTax, that facilitate taxpayers' compliance?
What does the IRS grant money for? Right? That would be a good question. There's 3 primary categories of people that receive free money from the IRS, grant money from the IRS. The first one is a program called the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. All right. So what this is, a program where a group of individuals that are tax professionals create an organization where they give voluntary tax preparation and tax filing assistance to members of the public, where they're helping people file their tax returns. All right. The second one is the low income tax clinics. Low income tax clinics were created by the IRS Restructuring Act back in 1998-99. These grant programs are given to nonprofit organizations that set up a income tax assistance program specifically to help people resolve their tax problem. All right. So in fact, I've had friends in the industry that have had these low income tax clinics, and they've operated these low income tax clinics. So somebody comes into your tax clinic, and these clinics are run by attorneys and accountants and enrolled agents. And so the IRS grants money to the low income tax clinics to have people like me represent folks that don't have any money to get their problem solved.
Well,
so
that
that's
sounds,
the third
that
one.
sounds like a good thing.
It's not a bad thing for sure. It's not a bad thing. There's no doubt about that.
I will say it does sound like a good thing until you realize, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be there if the income tax is gone.
It's a good thing, except for the fact that the problem is caused by the income tax in the first place. All right. So you've got this problem, and that's created by the income tax. So we're going to have the tax administrator send taxpayer money back to tax professionals to solve the problems that wouldn't exist if we didn't have the tax system. It's a circuitous thought process, no question about that. And then the third program that the IRS funds through grant program is tax tax counseling for the elderly. And these are clinics that are specifically set up for elderly citizens, senior citizens, to come in and get tax preparation assistance. So these are the programs that have been frozen. Now, they were unfrozen just about as fast as they were frozen. Hey, they were frozen on Monday. They were unfrozen on Wednesday. So the gravy train is back in business here now. The money is going back out, and we can only hope that the Department of Government Efficiency is going to take a hard look at this stuff, figure out where the waste, fraud, and duplication is in these various programs.
Well, like I said before, if someone is a low-income individual who has a tax problem, then those programs sound pretty good to them, and I don't deny that. But it seems like the problem certainly could just simply be solved by Trump taking a hard stand on the income tax and encouraging Congress to finally do something about that, which actually I saw a video of him doing that exactly. He made a speech about how America was its most wealthy and prosperous during a time of no income tax and tariffs only, and called on Congress to abolish the income tax.
The country was very, very prosperous when there was no income tax in place. I mean, let's look at this, for example. Most people don't understand the history here, right? They just haven't studied it. Why should they? Who sits up at night and reads a book about income tax history, right? Well, I live in Minnesota and it's cold in January and I have no life. So I sit in front of the fireplace and read about the income tax history. Here's the reality. The 16th Amendment, which authorized the federal income tax as we know it today, was not ratified until 1913. So really the tax we are all living with started in 1913. But the fact of the matter is the income tax started out at 1%. The highest tax rate was 6%, and the 1% rate, the lowest bracket, kicked in after $25,000 worth of income. 1913, $25,000 worth of income was a heck of a lot of money. It might be $300,000 or $400,000 worth of income today by comparison, all right, if we do inflation adjusted numbers. I haven't done the inflation adjusted numbers, but I'm just throwing that out as an illustration. So for the first 30 years until 1942, almost nobody in the United States paid an income tax. It quite literally was only the richest people in America that paid any income tax at all. 90% of Americans didn't have to file tax returns and didn't have to pay taxes. It wasn't until America was involved in World War II and Congress passed a law called the Victory Tax Act, which brought the income tax down to the levels where it affected Jane and Joe American for the first time. So it wasn't until 1942, 1943 that most Americans started having to file tax returns and started having to pay taxes. That's when wage withholding was introduced into the system, and that's the first time the vast majority of Americans ever paid any income tax. Once Congress got its hands on that money, Josh, you see the revenue to the United States government just spikes almost straight up in 1942, 1943, 1944, and of course most of that money was used to fight World War II. Fine. Well, World War II ended in the summer of 1945, and do you think Congress let that money go? They never let that money go. They never took their hands off the money, and they never repealed the laws that created the burden for the average American, and it's only gotten worse ever since. So America survived quite well without an income tax that hit the vast majority of American citizens, and they can do so again with the right financial structuring and financial planning. There's no doubt in my mind that it can be done again.
Well, we've talked about what that financial structuring would be, and it's just quite simply a retail sales tax. Is there anything in the news that's giving hope to the idea that that's coming to light finally?
We talked about this last time. The fair tax was introduced into Congress again. I forget the congressman that introduced it, but it's been introduced again. Buddy Carter, that's the guy. Buddy Carter introduced it into Congress, and this is about the fourth or fifth time it's been introduced, sixth time maybe that it's been introduced. So the point is that the discussion is out there. But I want to make another point about the prosperity of the United States without an income tax. By 1900, the United States of America occupied about 4% of the world's landmass. We had about 3% of the world's population. And with 4% of the world's landmass and about 3% of the world's population, the United States produced half of everything that was produced in the world. All right? I'm talking about transportation, communication, talking about luxury goods. I'm talking about textiles. I'm talking about energy products. Just go across the board. We produced half of everything in the world, even though we had 3% of the world's population. That was done without an income tax. The United States became fabulously wealthy without an income tax. And we need to keep that in mind going forward.
Definitely hope that Congress does something about it this time. There's a lot of speculation for Trump's new tax plan, though. I've seen a dozen or so headlines, and especially a lot of speculation on the left saying, oh, oh, Trump's new tax plan is going to hurt middle class people and poor people. But is there anything concrete yet?
This is what I said last month in an article as well, is that the first order of business for Congress and Trump, insofar as the tax plan is concerned, is to reaffirm the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was Trump's first tax plan that was passed in 2017, took effect in 2018. All right, if that tax law is not renewed, it expires at the end of this year. So if Congress does nothing, all of the 65 or 67 provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will go away. What that will do, and the Treasury Secretary, the newly confirmed Treasury Secretary, confirmed this, and I've been saying this for 5 years, is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a across-the-board tax reduction for middle-income Americans. The left has blathered the nonsense for 5 years, 6, 7 years, that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was tax cuts for the rich, and that is fundamentally false. It's demonstrably false. Bottom 80% of income earners received a tax cut under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The top 20% either saw their tax liability stay the same or go up under that law. So if that law is allowed to expire, the vast majority of American citizens that fall right into the heart of the middle class will see a tax increase. And our current Treasury Secretary, newly confirmed, knows that and said that to the Senate committee that was overseeing his confirmation hearing. So it is in fact true that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was tax cuts for the middle class and not tax cuts for the rich, and it has to be renewed. So regardless of whatever else happens under the heading of what we might call a fundamental or radical tax reform, it is absolutely true that Congress has got to renew the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
So the answer to is there anything concrete yet is no, there's nothing concrete. They just really need to do something soon.
Yes, that is right. Yeah, the answer is no, Josh.
Very long-winded no. Very political style no. But that's the truth of the matter, is they could either renew the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or they could cut out the entire heart of the income tax code.
We always have the undercurrent of what I call radical tax reform. I truly believe, and I've said this 1,000 times, that we have got to stop tinkering around the edges. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as good as it was for the economy, and it was very good for the American economy, as good as it was for middle-income Americans, and it was very good for middle-income Americans, is still tinkering around the edges. All right, we've got a tax code that consists of more than 4 million words that's been changed more than 6,000 times just since 2001 alone, and that doesn't even count all of the COVID era changes that took place starting in 2020 and moving 2021, 2022. Right, doesn't count any of that stuff, which is hundreds of more changes. Right, we've got to stop stirring the pot, and we have to start repealing. And what we need to repeal, in my opinion, is the Internal Revenue Code lock, stock, and barrel.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was good for the economy in the sense of antibiotics are good for festering wound. If you get rid of the festering wound in the first place, then you don't have to have the antibiotics.
If you stop hacking at your arm with an axe, you won't get a festering wound, you won't need the antibiotics, right? Yeah. Our tax system is equivalent to hacking at the economy's arm with an axe. It keeps infesting the economy with infections. We have to get rid of it. The current income tax system that we have now is the most inefficient way that there is to collect taxes that any human being could possibly think of.
If the IRS dies from attrition, if it dies from lack of funding and lack of manpower, doesn't that just inherently mean that the income tax will be unenforceable and people will just stop paying it?
Well, this is what I said 20 years ago when I was working so hard to change the income tax system, to abolish the current income tax. I made the statement then, and I stand by it now. We cannot expect Congress to do the right thing for the right reason, to recognize that this tax system is fundamentally flawed morally and economically and constitutionally and needs to be bulldozed completely. I did not believe, and I don't believe, that Congress is going to come to its senses and realize that that's true, but they are going to have to deal with the fact that the system is collapsing under its own weight, all right? And that is what we're seeing now over the last several years, probably 10 years or so, the system collapsing under its own weight. There's too much bureaucracy built into the Internal Revenue Service. There's too many demands that are put on the agency as far as law enforcement are concerned. And one of the biggest demands, recent demands, was the IRS's responsibility for administering Obamacare from the standpoint of collecting the tax and enforcing the insurance mandate and all the rest of that stuff. You heap more and more and more burdens on the IRS that don't fall into the category of what they call core responsibilities, right? It's called mission expansion, where they're giving the agency too many duties that are outside of its core area of expertise. It's overloading, overburdening the system.
The Tower of Babel comes to mind, something that just become too big for its own good and collapse under its own weight. I, for one, look forward to watching it implode. Where can we find you, and what can people do to get you on the phone?
If you've got a tax problem right now, I don't care what kind of problem you have. I don't care how long you've had the problem. I don't care what you've tried to do to fix the problem. I don't care who's told you you can't fix the problem. There's no such thing as a hopeless tax case. Go to my website, TaxHelpOnline.com. You buy any book off my website at any price point, and you get a free 15-minute consultation directly with me. TaxHelpOnline.com. The link is in the description below.